So I just thought that I'd edit one of the photos from the shoot earlier today. These were my 3 favourite photos with Jess. I really like the expression on that one. That's just kind of cool, I think. And that's my favourite, that's the one I'm going to edit now. So the first thing I should say is, when I say I shoot for the edit, this is what I mean. It tends to come out quite flat, sometimes a little bit underexposed. The reason for that is, one, because it's a raw file, it will always need a bit of editing and a bit of work to it. But the other is that I'm more interested in making sure that there are no hot spots on her face and that the background, isn't blown out or too dark. That's what I mean when I say I shoot for the edit. Some people also call that shooting to the right, which basically means that you have your histogram looking pretty even with no big spikes on the highlights or the shadows where you lose detail. When I say I shoot for the edit, this is what I mean, because it will always need a little bit of work afterwards. So we're going to the develop module now. So the first thing I'm going to do is just bring up the exposure because it's a bit too dark. So I'm going to do that by about half a stop. Yeah, that's looking good. So the first thing I'm seeing now is that it looks a little bit cold to me, and I didn't change my white balance through the shoot, so that would have just changed as the time of day changed. So I'm just going to warm this up a bit. I'm going to make it about 5500 Kelvin. That's usually around daylight white balance. That's looking better. Skin tone's looking a little bit green, I think, though, so I'm going to up the amount of magenta here. So at about 23-ish. And so it's subtle, but you can just see the colour difference anyway is subtle, but you can see the difference there. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just increase the contrast, make it pop a little bit more. So when we're increasing the contrast, what we're doing is particularly the between the contrasting edges, so where the dark and the light tend to meet. When we increase that, it makes the photo pop more. So that's what I'm trying to do here. The blacks are just the level of the blacks and the deepness of the blacks, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit. To bring the white point up, so the white point is the quality of the brightest parts of the image. So just do that. That's a good way of brightening kind of the mid-tones of the image. And just make sure that her face isn't too exposed. So no, that's alright. So I will just bring the highlights down a touch. That's looking good. So if you see what we've done so far, quite a difference. So next thing I do is, if I zoom back in again to 100%, you can see how there's a lot of the detail of her face, the makeup. That's because my lens is very, very sharp. It's almost too sharp for portraits. It gives it a very kind of clinical rather than an organic kind of feel, so I always feel like I need to reduce the sharpness. The easiest way for this, for me, is I just bring the clarity down a bit. So I bring that down usually to -20. And the texture down to -10. It just gives a much more organic kind of feel to the image. It's still sharp, it's just reduced kind of the roughness and the roughness and the clarity to it. So I'm going to add a little bit of vibrance because it's a little bit flat. So about 10 and a tiny bit of saturation, but not too much. I'm actually going to add saturation in a different way a little bit later. Right, for the next part, so what I usually do is just work my way down through the panels. So I've gone through the basic, now I'm onto the tone curve. I don't always do this, but for this image I will. I want to again make it feel a bit more organic and almost analog in how it feels, as again it just feels a bit cold and clinical and sterile to me. So I want something to feel a bit more warmer and analog, a bit more like film would have looked, because it's got that kind of filmic look to me. So all we do with the tone curve is we add a couple of extra points. So now we've got so from top to bottom we've got our brightest points, then kind of the brightest mid-tones, the darkest mid-tones, and then our darkest shadows and black areas. So I like to start at the bottom here, and I'm just going to bring this up a bit. This will just muddy the blacks a little bit and just take some of that sort of clinical kind of look away from it a bit. I like it around about 12 or so. So you just see there, it's just kind of, it's not just that it's lifting the shadows, it's actually sort of giving it a different quality. There, so it's subtle. I don't want to go overdo it, but I just want it to be a little bit, feel a little bit more lived in and organic. I'll do the same here. I'm going to bring this down a bit so that we're bringing back some of that sort of darkness and contrast. Yeah. Bring this up a little bit, I think. So this is the brightness around her face in the middle of the frame. Bring this down a bit, and always bring the highlights down a little bit because they can be quite harsh, the very brightest bits. So you can see here how it's taking on a very slight kind of S-curve, so that's why we call this some people call this an S-curve rather than a tone curve. I just like to use it very subtly. I don't like to do too much to it. I'm just taking away some of the rough edges and the harsh edges on it. So okay, so the next thing here is her arm here is a little bit dark compared to the rest of the image. That's just because we were lighting more of her face and this area, and her arm just was a bit off axis to the light, so I'll just add a bit more exposure to that. So I'm going to do the object selection and then just roughly draw around her arm and hand there. It's done a pretty good job. So just raise the exposure a little bit. Maybe the shadows a touch as well. There we go, so just a little bit, but it just sort of brings everything together a little bit more, I think. Yep, so I'm happy with that. So I'll go down next. I'm not going to do the color mixer. This is where I could change the colors if I wanted to, but I'm actually going to do color grading instead. Because what's happening is that the image is quite well balanced now, but her skin color still isn't quite accurate for what I want anyway. So what I usually do is I start with the shadows and I try to invert this. So the shadows are the dark areas, they're usually cool or blue. So I like to introduce some warmth into them to sort of warm up the image a little bit in those areas. So I like to take this way too far just so I can see what it's doing, and then I'll dial it back. So I'm going to go somewhere around about 60, I think. Right, so turn it on and off. You can see it's just only really, so it's doing the rock, it's doing her cloak, it's doing that kind of stuff. It's not really touching her skin very much, which is what we want. We just want a very subtle kind of lift to those areas. So I reckon around about there, around about 12. There, see, subtle, but it's just warmed it a little bit and makes it feel more natural again. So now we'll do the reverse, we'll do the highlights, and because these are the brighter areas, they're the warmer areas, you want to use cooler tones for this, or at least I do. You can, there's no right or wrong, but this is just how I like to work with the tones. So I'm going to go around about 215. Bring it back down again. This can be a bit stronger, I think, because there's more of the there's less of those tones, so you want it to blend a bit better. So I might go 14. It's the eye drop here, just turn it on and off. Yes, you see what that's done to her hair around here and around the hat as well. It's just brought a little bit of blue back in, and it's just a nice mixture together. Now the midtones will mostly be her skin here, so I actually want to make this a little bit reddy pink. So we want something that will just sort of warm up her skin and bring it back to a slightly more natural kind of tint. So maybe around 340, bring the saturation back, and just want this to be very subtle, but to give it a bit more of a rosy kind of glow back to her skin. So we turn that on and off. It's done it in a couple of other areas as well, but I actually quite like that. I like that it's added a little bit of warmth back here as well. but what I'm going to do now, so you've got the blending and the balance. So the blending will sort of try to take the rough edges off all three and blend them together, and you can go one way or the other to prioritize whether you want it to be dark, to be warmer or colder. So this is warmer, that's a bit colder, so I'm going to go a little bit colder for this. But this will only really be on the edges. The balance is what we actually want to tell it, do we want the whole image to be more green? Do we want it to be more blue? Do you want it somewhere in the middle? I want it right about there, I think, where it's just all blended together quite nicely. And if we turn it on and off, the whole thing, see, very subtle, but it just makes it feel more real somehow, more organic and three-dimensional, because you're trying to work with a two-dimensional plane essentially, but the way we've got her body angled, the way the rock is, it's giving the perception that there's more behind there. So we're trying to make this whole image feel alive and three-dimensional, and just that those little bits just help to do that, and to make her skin tones seem a bit more natural. Though I don't want this to be totally natural, so I want to sort of play into this whole idea of it being sort of otherworldly and a bit eerie. So you go down here, leave the sharpening and all of that. We'll make sure, I don't think there are any chromatic aberrations, but just to be safe. I will use the vignette at some stage, but I'm going to take it into Photoshop first to do that. Now down here in the calibration, this actually will shift the colours at the pixel level, so I like to use this sometimes too. And this can sometimes just balance those bits out again if you need them to. So you see how that makes it much more purple, that makes it much more green. So I might just shift it a tiny bit to the green. Yep, that's better. And so that's basically just shifted at the green sort of pixel level rather than the blue and the red. Whereas again, even using the color grading, it's still doing it across all of the pixels, even though it's, well, all of the pixels that are in the highlights or the shadow areas. Whereas this now is just changing that bit, shifting the red more towards green. So it's all little changes and little details like that, but they make quite a difference in the end. So that's the before, that's the after. That's the before, that's the after. So looking at it's a little bit bright for me, so I might just bring the whites back down again. And a lot of this is, you'll make changes, then you'll go to another bit, and then you'll come back later and realise you need to adjust a little bit. So I do that all the time. So I reckon around about there is good now. Yep. So now I'm going to take this into Photoshop just to do some finishing touches. Usually it's spot removal and that kind of thing, and I prefer doing that in Photoshop. You absolutely can do it in Camera Raw or Lightroom or Capture One or anything else. I just prefer doing it in Photoshop because it has a little more control. But also I've used Photoshop for so long that it's natural to me. But if you don't like Photoshop, you absolutely can do it in the other programs too. So I tend to use the Remove tool the most here. One of the reasons I like this is it doesn't seem to use Adobe's generative credits. If you were to make a selection, so if I was to, say I wanted this rock to go across, so let's say I did that. So if I went up here to generative fill, that would be a credit, and every time I generate an image or generate a variation, that would be a credit. And I get 250 credits a month, which sounds like a lot, but when you do a lot of photos, it goes pretty quickly, so I try to save those where I can, and particularly for simple sort of spot removals like these little marks here, really don't need it. Just either, you could clone it out the old-fashioned way, but the remove works really, really well. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, so I just want to make it a little bit bigger than the area. Then I'll just draw across it and gone. It's got another one up here. And these are all pretty, actually I might redo that, this didn't work as well as I'd like. Sometimes the area can be a bit too big and then it doesn't feel natural as well. So a lot of this doesn't need doing, but it's just kind of finishing off the image and making sure that, you know, any areas, any makeup's kind of all blended together and it all feels natural. You know, you'll see the pores more, you'll see the makeup, you'll see that, but we don't actually look at an image at this size. We're looking much more at this. This is how it should be viewed. And so everything blends in and looks, you know, normal. It's not normal to be zoomed in that much, but that's what we do to make sure that all the marks aren't there. And yeah. My rule for this kind of thing is, as well, is that I'll edit away any blemishes or anything that wouldn't be there if you had time. So if it was a pimple, that would be gone in a few days. If you had a cut, that would heal. You know, if you had a stray hair that was out of place or something like that, I'm happy to do that. What I don't like to do is change something that stops you from looking like you. So I won't, you know, take 20 kilos off somebody. I won't, you know, remove a birthmark that everybody would notice if it was gone, kind of thing. So, but little retouches like this, you know, that's fine. I'm happy doing that kind of stuff. Just checking, sometimes you get marks around the neckline. Right, so that's pretty good, I think. Let's zoom out again. Yep, that's pretty good. So what I like to do now before I take it back into Lightroom is under image you have auto tone, auto contrast and auto color. So what I usually do when I'm editing is I will stop after I've done this stage. I'll go away, I'll have a cup of tea or something like that, and then come back with fresh eyes, and then I will usually be able to see if I've pushed something too far or I need to make a little change or something, usually with the contrast. But because I don't have that time and I can't sort of come back to it now, what I like to do instead is I'll use the auto contrast, which is basically Photoshop's way of saying, hey, do you think the image is balanced or not, and it will try to balance it. Usually I get it pretty close, but there's often a tiny bit of change, and again, this is what I'd pick up if I was coming back to it 5-10 minutes later. It's just kind of a time saver, particularly when I'm doing a lot of photos all at once, or I just, you know, don't have time, I have to run out the door kind of thing. So I'll try that. Auto tone will also try to fix the white balance. I don't like that as much. I find the well, I'll show you. I find it is wacky, it doesn't quite work, so I don't like auto tone that much. Auto color tries to fix the color in the image, and it does the same kind of thing. Sometimes it's good, that's not too bad, but it's not the look I'm going for. But auto contrast is usually pretty good, and so this should be, it'll probably brighten it a little bit, but it shouldn't be dramatic. Yeah, see, it's a little bit dull. My one is maybe a little bit dull, but I feel like when it does that, it's a little bit too far. So I'll split the difference. If I go up to edit, I can do fade, and I'll just bring this back a bit. So bring this back maybe halfway, and that's right between the two. So I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so I'll hit save. We'll open back up in Lightroom in a minute. This is the joy of working with 61 megapixel files. It takes a while on an old computer. There you go. So if we look at the one we had before we went into Photoshop, you can just see it's just a very subtle difference, but it is a little bit brighter, and those marks are gone, obviously. So the last thing I like to do is I'll add a vignette. So all this is doing is just darkening the edges so that our line of sight is drawn towards our subject. So down here, so I'll do this quite strong, and then I'll bring it back. I just want to be able to see exactly what it's doing, so I'll do it about 30-ish. So the midpoint is just kind of saying how far do you want it to come into the image. I want it to come to sort of around the hat kind of area. Then the roundness is just the shape. Bring that down a bit, and the feathering is the transition area basically. So that's looking pretty good, I think. So now I'll just back it off. I want it to be subtle, but you know, still, I don't want you to be able to know I've done it unless you look for it, and then you'll be able to kind of see it. So I think that's pretty good. And I'm just going to do a reverse vignette as well. So now I'm going to go back up here to the basic panel. I'm going to get the radial gradient, and I just want to draw a bit more attention to her face. But I want to be careful not to get too much of the hair as well, so I'm going to make sure that the feather's up a bit, so hopefully won't affect it as much. I just want a little bit more light there, so it's a little bit ethereal. And I might just add a little bit more colour to the face as well. Yep, that's pretty good, I think. Before, after. Might brighten it a little bit more. Point 2. Okay. Yep, that's good. Okay, and that would be my finished photo. Hope you found that interesting, and yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. Bye.